I'm sorry, but my friend said you were successful. Victoria Bennett's words landed softly across the white tablecloth, which somehow made them sharper. Daniel Hayes did not flinch. He simply set down his water glass and looked at the woman sitting across from him beneath the warm amber lights of Bellamy's, one of downtown Chicago's most polished restaurants. Victoria was 37, elegant, composed, and accustomed to entering rooms where people already knew her name. As CEO of Bennett Meridian, she wore success naturally. Tailored charcoal suit, understated diamond earrings, a silver watch, and the calm authority of someone who rarely heard the word no. Daniel was 39. His navy sport coat was several years old, his white shirt carefully pressed, his brown shoes polished enough to hide most of their age. His hands, however, told the truth. Small calluses crossed his fingers from years of repairing commercial heating systems and electrical equipment. Maybe your friend and I use different definitions, Daniel said. Victoria raised one eyebrow. You're a maintenance technician, building systems technician. Is there a difference? About 8 certifications and a lot more ladders. A faint smile touched Daniel's face. Victoria did not return it. Outside, November rain painted silver streaks across the windows while taxis rolled along Michigan Avenue. Inside, glasses chimed, silverware clicked, and a piano played quietly near the bar. Daniel glanced toward the empty third chair at their table. He had noticed it when the host seated them. For reasons Victoria could not understand, his eyes kept returning to it. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. "No." "Then why do you keep looking at that chair?" Daniel paused. "Habit, maybe." Victoria studied him, unconvinced. Their mutual friend had described Daniel as intelligent, dependable, and unusually kind. She had pictured someone different, someone with an executive title, someone whose car did not have 12 years and 146,000 miles behind it. She had seen his aging blue Chevrolet in valet parking and assumed it belonged to an employee. "I should probably be direct," Victoria said. "Please. My life is demanding. I travel. I manage nearly 3,000 employees. I don't have much room for complications." Daniel's expression remained calm. "Neither do I." That answer surprised her. "You have a 9-year-old daughter, Sophie." His voice changed when he said the name. Warmer, softer. "She's not a complication. You know what I mean?" "I know exactly what you mean." Victoria leaned back. "And that doesn't bother you?" "What?" That we're obviously in very different places financially. Daniel looked around the expensive dining room, then back at her. "I knew where you worked before I came. And you weren't intimidated? Was I supposed to be?" For the first time, Victoria looked irritated. Confidence is admirable when it has something behind it. Daniel absorbed the insult without returning one. 3 seconds passed. Then 5. The piano continued playing. "You could defend yourself," Victoria said. "I could, but you won't. I learned a long time ago that dignity gets expensive when you spend it proving yourself to strangers." Something flickered across Victoria's face, but disappeared quickly. Daniel reached inside his jacket and checked his wallet discreetly. 3 $20 bills sat behind his driver's license. $60. Enough for the meal he had carefully budgeted for, including the tip. He had skipped takeout twice that month and packed lunch every day because he had promised Sophie he would give this date an honest chance. Victoria noticed the bills. "You brought $60 to Bellamy's?" Daniel slowly closed the wallet. "Enough for what I planned to order." Victoria stared at him, almost amused. Daniel said nothing. Instead, his gaze drifted once more toward the empty third chair. That afternoon, Sophie had asked him one question before he left home. "Daddy, if she turns out to be kind, do you think someday I could sit with you both?" Daniel had promised nothing. But now, while Victoria measured him by the money in his wallet, he realized the most important person in his life might soon reveal exactly what that EMP, right? A variant equals document ID equals 62107, title equals part 2. Victoria's eyes lingered on Daniel's wallet for a second longer than courtesy allowed. $60, she repeated, almost to herself. Daniel slipped the wallet back inside his jacket. "Is there a question in there?" "I'm just surprised." "By the amount?" "By the planning." Victoria lifted her menu. Most people coming here don't calculate dinner down to the dollar. Daniel looked at the prices printed beneath elegant descriptions of steaks and seafood. Most people probably have different budgets. Then why agree to Bellamy's? You chose it. You could have suggested somewhere else. I could have, but you didn't. Daniel smiled faintly. I wanted to meet you, Victoria. Dinner was just a location. The server approached, and Victoria ordered sparkling water and the sea base without looking at the price. Daniel chose the grilled chicken, the least expensive entree that would still leave enough for tax and a proper tip. When the server walked away, Victoria folded her hands. You really did calculate it. I told you I planned ahead. That sounds exhausting. Not really. Budgets are just promises you make to tomorrow. Victoria gave him a puzzled look. That sounds like something printed on a refrigerator magnet. Actually, Sophie said it after I explained why we couldn't buy a new television. Your daughter gives financial advice? Mostly she requests pancakes. For half a second, Victoria almost laughed. Then her gaze returned to Daniel's worn cuffs. I don't understand something. You're 39. You work full-time. You have certifications. Yet $60 requires weeks of planning. Life costs money. So does ambition. Daniel's smile disappeared. Those aren't opposites. Aren't they? Victoria leaned forward. I started my company with 2 employees and a rented office above a dry cleaner. I worked 80-hour weeks. I slept under my desk twice during our first product launch. Nobody handed me anything. That's impressive. You don't sound impressed. I am. Then why do I feel like you're judging me? Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting question. Victoria understood the point immediately and disliked it. I'm being practical. So am I. Daniel, practical means recognizing reality. You and I live in different worlds. We're sitting at the same table. For one evening. That's usually how first dates work. Her expression tightened. You make everything sound simple. Some things are. Success isn't. Daniel glanced toward the empty chair again. Depends how you measure it. Victoria followed his eyes. All right. How do you measure it? Daniel was quiet for a moment. My daughter sleeps through the night now. Victoria blinked. That's your answer? Yes. I'm talking about success. So am I. The restaurant seemed to recede around them. Daniel's voice remained low. For almost a year after her mother died, Sophie woke up terrified that everyone she loved would disappear. Some nights, I sat outside her bedroom until sunrise because she needed to hear me breathing down the hall. Victoria's face softened, but only briefly. I'm sorry about your wife. Thank you. But surely you wanted more for yourself. Daniel looked at her steadily. I wanted Sophie to feel safe. That's parenting, not a career. I never said it was a career. Then what happened to your ambitions? Daniel took a slow breath. They changed. Victoria shook her head. That sounds like what people say when life doesn't work out. The sentence hung between them. Daniel did not defend himself. He simply reached for his water. Victoria mistook the silence for surrender. I'm sorry, but I need someone who can stand beside me, not someone who has accepted less. Daniel set down the glass. You keep assuming less money means less life. Before Victoria could answer, his phone vibrated against the table. Daniel glanced at the screen. The message was from Sophie. Daddy, Mrs. Carter feels sick and called Aunt Melissa. She says I may need to come downtown with her. Daniel's expression changed instantly. Victoria noticed. Your daughter? He nodded. Another message appeared. I brought the little gift I made for the nice lady, just in case. Daniel looked toward the empty third chair, and for the first time that night, it no lawn. : Writing variant equals document ID equals for 8126 title equals part 3. Daniel read Sophie's message twice before typing back. Stay with Aunt Melissa. Tell me when you leave. Love you. He placed the phone beside his water glass, but Victoria had already noticed the concern in his face. Everything all right? She asked. Sophie's sitter isn't feeling well. My sister-in-law may bring her downtown. Here. Possibly. If that happens, I'll meet them outside and take Sophie home. Victoria leaned back. So the date ends because your babysitter has a bad evening? Daniel looked at her. The date ends if my daughter needs me. That's exactly what I mean about different worlds. Maybe my board doesn't stop a meeting because my personal life becomes inconvenient. Sophie isn't my personal inconvenience. You know what I mean? You keep saying that after things you probably shouldn't say. Victoria's eyes narrowed. 3 short exchanges, then silence. The piano moved into a slow jazz melody while rain whispered against the windows. Daniel looked again at the empty chair. This time Victoria noticed something different in his expression. Not worry. Hope mixed with caution. What did she text you? That she might be coming downtown. There was more. Daniel hesitated. She made you something. Victoria blinked. Me? She knew I was nervous about tonight. You told a 9-year-old you were nervous? Sophie and I talk. About dating? About life. Victoria shook her head slightly. I don't understand how you can organize everything around one person. Daniel's expression softened. Because she's my daughter. But there has to be room for you. There is. Where? Daniel glanced down at his hands. Saturday morning coffee before she wakes up. Baseball on the radio while I'm fixing something in the garage. 20 minutes reading before bed after she falls asleep. Victoria stared at him. That's your life. Part of it. And you're satisfied? Most days. You really don't want more? Daniel looked directly at her. I want Sophie to grow up kind. I want enough money to keep the lights on and something saved for emergencies. I want work I don't have to be ashamed of. And someday, maybe I'd like someone sitting in that chair who understands why those things matter. Victoria followed his gaze. So that's what the empty chair means. Sophie asked me this afternoon whether she might sit with us someday, if tonight went well. Something flickered behind Victoria's eyes. That's a lot of expectation for a blind date. To her, it's not about dating. Then what is it about? Daniel was quiet for several seconds. Seeing me happy again. The server arrived with their meals, setting Victoria's sea base before her and Daniel's grilled chicken beside his water. Steam rose between them. Daniel thanked him by name after reading his badge. Victoria barely noticed the food. How long has it been? She asked. Since Rachel died? 5 years next March. And you haven't had a serious relationship since? No, why? Daniel cut a small piece of chicken. Because Sophie had already learned that people can disappear. I wasn't going to introduce strangers into her life casually. Victoria looked down at her plate. So I'm being evaluated too. Daniel almost smiled. Everyone is. By Sophie. Eventually. What would she care about? My job. No money. Definitely not. Then what? Daniel answered without hesitation. Whether you're kind when there's nothing to gain from it. Victoria stopped moving. For the first time that evening, her resume had nowhere to stand. And what would she think of me tonight? She asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. That silence told her enough. You think I'm cruel. I think you're used to measuring people quickly. That's how I survived in business. Maybe it works there. And not here. Daniel glanced toward the empty chair. People aren't companies, Victoria. You can't value them from a balance sheet. His phone vibrated again. Sophie, we're leaving now. Aunt Melissa says Bellamy's is only 10 minutes away. Then another message appeared beneath it. Don't leave before I get there, Daddy. I want to see if she has kind eyes. Daniel stared at those words. Victoria noticed his expression. What did she say? Daniel slowly locked the screen. She wants to meet you. Victoria's confidence faltered for the first time. Tonight, Daniel looked at writing variant equals document ID equals 30584 title equals part 4. Victoria looked at the empty chair as if it had suddenly become the most important seat in the restaurant. 10 minutes, she repeated. Daniel nodded. Maybe less. And you're actually going to let her meet me after how this evening has gone? Daniel folded his napkin beside his barely touched plate. No, Victoria blinked. No, I'm going downstairs to meet Sophie. Then I'm taking her home. But you just said she wants to meet me. Wanting something doesn't always mean it's good for her. Victoria's expression hardened, almost automatically. So now I'm not good enough to meet your daughter? Daniel looked at her for several quiet seconds. That's not what I said. It sounds like it. Victoria, you've spent most of this dinner explaining why I'm not good enough for your world. I'm not going to turn around and do the same thing to you. The answer stopped her. Daniel reached for his wallet. I just don't think Sophie needs to walk into the middle of this. The middle of what? Two adults realizing they probably shouldn't have had dinner together. Victoria's jaw tightened. You're making this dramatic. I'm trying to make it simple. He pulled out the three $20 bills and placed them neatly beside his plate. That should cover my meal and tip. Victoria stared at the money. Daniel, don't be ridiculous. I'm paying my share. Your entree alone was almost $30. I checked before ordering. I'll cover dinner. No, thank you. Victoria reached for the black card beside her plate. This entire bill means nothing to me. Daniel's hand stopped. He looked at her, and for the first time that evening there was unmistakable hurt behind his calm. I know. Victoria realized too late how the sentence sounded. That isn't what I meant. Maybe not. I'm trying to be generous. Generosity doesn't make the other person feel smaller. You're being overly sensitive. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. And there it is. He stood and buttoned his old navy jacket. Thank you for dinner, Victoria. You barely ate. I lost my appetite. She lowered her voice. You're seriously walking out because I offer to pay? No, I'm leaving because my daughter is coming. And I don't want her first memory of you to be watching you explain why her father isn't enough. Silence settled over the table. Victoria glanced toward nearby diners and noticed two people quickly look away. Embarrassment rose in her face. You think I'm some kind of terrible person? I don't know you well enough to decide what kind of person you are. Daniel slipped his wallet into his pocket. That's the difference between us tonight. Victoria had no answer. Daniel turned toward the staircase leading to Bellamy's lobby. Daniel, he stopped. For what it's worth, Victoria said, I didn't mean to insult your daughter. He looked back. You didn't. Then why does this feel like I did? Daniel's voice softened. Because children learn what they deserve by watching what their parents accept. He walked away. The words stay behind. Victoria looked at the untouched chair, the $60, the modest dinner Daniel had saved weeks to afford. For years, she had believed dignity was easier when a person had options. Daniel had fewer options than almost anyone she dated, yet he had walked away from her money without hesitation. Her phone lit up with 3 missed messages from her chief operating officer. She turned it face down. Downstairs, the glass entrance doors opened, bringing in a breath of cold November air. Daniel had just reached the lobby when a small girl in a bright red coat hurried inside beside a woman in her early 40s. Daddy, Sophie called. Daniel's entire face changed. He crouched as Sophie rushed into his arms, holding a small paper bag carefully against her chest. Victoria had followed only as far as the top of the stairs, intending to retrieve her coat. Instead, she stopped. Sophie whispered something to Daniel. He shook his head gently. The little girl looked disappointed. Then she glanced past him and saw Victoria standing above them. Sophie's eyes widened. She compared Victoria's face to something she apparently remembered, then looked down at the gift bag in her hands. Daddy, she whispered, loud enough for Victoria to hear in the suddenly quiet lobby. That's her, isn't it? : Writing variant equals document ID equals 57403, title equals part. 5-inch. Daniel's expression softened as he looked at Sophie, but something guarded remained behind his eyes. Sweetheart, we were just leaving. Sophie looked from him to Victoria, then back again. But I brought her something. Aunt Melissa stood near the doors, brushing rain from her coat. She gave Daniel an apologetic smile. I tried explaining that tonight might not be the right time. It took me 3 days, Sophie said, hugging the little paper bag against her red coat. Victoria slowly descended the remaining stairs. She could have collected her coat and walked past them. 20 minutes earlier, she probably would have. Instead, she stopped several feet away. Sophie studied her with the solemn concentration only a child could make feel completely honest. Hi, she said. Victoria managed a small smile. Sophia. Sophie's eyebrows rose. You know my name? Victoria glanced at Daniel. Your dad talks about you. A lot. Enough for me to know you're important. Sophie smiled. He talks about Mom too, but mostly when he thinks I'm asleep. Daniel looked toward Melissa as if hoping for rescue. Melissa merely hid a smile. Sophie stepped closer to Victoria. Daddy said if tonight went really well, maybe someday we could all get pancakes. Victoria's eyes moved to Daniel. Pancakes. She negotiates most of life through breakfast food, Daniel said. Sophie held out the bag. This is for you. Victoria hesitative. Sophie, you don't have to give me anything. I know. Then why did you make it? The girl looked down at the bag. Because Daddy hasn't gone on a real date since Mom died, and he looked scared today. I was not scared, Daniel said. Sophie turned. You changed shirts 4 times. 3. For if you count the blue one you put back on. Melissa coughed to hide a laugh. Even Victoria smiled, but the smile faded when Sophie extended the gift again. I wanted you to know somebody was hoping you'd be nice to him. The words were innocent. They landed like truth. Victoria slowly accepted the bag. Inside, wrapped in white tissue paper, was a handmade keychain made from blue cord and wooden beads. A small metal tag hung at the bottom. Victoria turned it over. 3 words had been carefully stamped into the surface. Make room for kindness. I made it at school, Sophie said. Mrs. Alvarez helped with the letters. Victoria ran her thumb across them. It's beautiful. Blue is Daddy's favorite color. Daniel looked away. Sophie tilted her head. Did you have a good date? Silence. Victoria opened her mouth, but Daniel answered first. We learned some things about each other. Sophie considered that. That sounds like a dad answer. It is absolutely a dad answer. Did he tell his thermostat joke? No, then it couldn't have been that bad. Daniel almost laughed. Victoria didn't. She remembered the $60 upstairs. The old Chevrolet she had mocked. The way she had called his daughter a complication without ever seeing this bright little girl standing before her. Sophie, Victoria said carefully, your dad was very respectful to me tonight. Of course. The certainty in Sophie's voice surprised her. He says you can tell what somebody's really like by how they treat people who can't do anything for them. Victoria's fingers closed around the keychain. He says that all the time. Sophie looked toward Daniel, especially after what happened with his engineering job. Daniel became completely still. Sophomore, the girl immediately sensed the change. Was that a secret? Victoria looked at him. Engineering job? Daniel shook his head. It doesn't matter. Sophie frowned. It mattered to Mom. Daniel's voice softened. Sweetheart. But Sophie had already turned back to Victoria. Daddy was supposed to design buildings. He had a special job waiting for him after college. Victoria stared at Daniel's calloused hands, suddenly seeing them differently. You're an engineer? I have a degree. Then why are you working maintenance? Daniel said nothing. Sophie reached for his hand. Because of me. The lobby seemed to grow quieter. What do you mean? Victoria asked. Sophie looked up at her father with unmistakable love. After Mom died, I couldn't sleep unless Daddy stayed close. His new job meant traveling all the time, so he told them no. Daniel squeezed his daughter's hand. Sophie, you were never the reason I lost anything. I know, she said. Then she looked directly at Victoria. Daddy says choosing someone you love isn't losing. Victoria lowered her eyes to the handmade keychain. Minutes earlier, she had though, : writing variant equals document ID equals 64027, title equals part 6. Victoria stared at Daniel as the meaning of Sophie's words settled over the quiet lobby. You had an engineering position waiting for you? She asked. Daniel glanced toward his daughter. It was a long time ago. That doesn't answer the question. Yes. Victoria's eyes narrowed, not with judgment now, but disbelief. What kind of position? Daniel hesitated. Mechanical systems design. A firm in Milwaukee recruited me after graduation. And you turned it down? Eventually. Sophie squeezed his hand. Daddy, he looked down. What? You always say telling half the truth is how grown-ups make lying sound polite. Aunt Melissa covered a smile with her hand. Daniel sighed. I'm beginning to regret teaching you anything. Sophie smiled. Victoria Watif. Finally, Daniel looked toward the rain streaking the glass doors. The offer came about 6 months after Rachel died. Starting salary was almost twice what I was making. Better benefits. Clear path into senior design. Then why not take it and move Sophie with you? Because moving wasn't the problem. Daniel's voice grew quieter. Travel was. The firm handled projects across several states. I would have been gone 10 or 12 days some months, sometimes longer. Victoria glanced at Sophie. And she couldn't handle that. Daniel shook his head. She was 4 years old. She had watched her mother get sick, watched our routines disappear, Watched adults keep telling her everything would be okay when nothing felt okay. After Rachel was gone, Sophie started checking every room before bed. Sophie lowered her eyes. Daniel crouched beside her. Hey, none of this was your fault. I know. Do you? Sophie nodded. You told me 1,000,000 times. Good. About another 1,000,000 ready. She smiled faintly. Daniel stood again. One night, I went downstairs to fix the furnace. 20 minutes later, Sophie woke up and couldn't find me. After that, she slept outside my bedroom door for almost a week. Victoria's confidence seemed to drain from her face. So you declined the offer. I asked them for less travel. They couldn't guarantee it. I stayed in Chicago and took a maintenance job, a building systems job with predictable hours, health insurance, and a supervisor who understood that if Sophie's school called, I left. Victoria looked at his hands. She remembered asking whether there was a difference between maintenance technician and building systems technician. She remembered the amusement in her own voice. You could have told me all of this upstairs. Why? Because I was judging you. Exactly. That would have changed my opinion. Daniel held her gaze. Then your respect would have depended on discovering that I had credentials you considered worthy. Victoria had no immediate response. I shouldn't need an engineering degree to deserve basic respect, he continued. Neither should the waiter upstairs. Neither should the valet. Neither should the person cleaning your office after everyone goes home. 3 examples. One truth. Victoria looked down at the little keychain Sophie had made. Make room for kindness. I thought you had settled, she admitted. I did settle. Daniel's answer surprised her. For what? Being present. Sophie leaned against his side. People hear that word and assume it means surrender. Sometimes settling means deciding what matters and planting your feet beside it. Victoria swallowed. Do you regret it? Daniel looked down at Sophie. Not once. Sophie immediately corrected him. You regretted selling the Mustang. Daniel laughed softly. That was different. Victoria looked up. You sold a Mustang too? College car. To pay bills. Daniel nodded. Sophie added proudly. And my preschool. Soph, we don't need the complete financial history. But she thought you weren't successful. The innocence of the sentence stripped away every defense Victoria had left. She looked at Daniel, then at the old keychain in her palm, then at Sophie. Yes, Victoria said softly. I did. Sophie studied her face for a moment. Daddy says successful people should make other people feel bigger, not smaller. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Apparently tonight is the collected wisdom of Daniel Hayes. But Victoria did not smile. Did I make your dad feel smaller tonight? She asked. Sophie looked up at Daniel before answering. I don't think anybody can make Daddy small. She paused. But they can make him quiet. Victoria remembered the table upstairs. The insults. The $60. Daniel refusing to defend himself. How do you know when he's hurt? Sophie asked softly. He gets extra quiet. The lobby seemed to obey her words. : Writing variant equals document. ID equals 78214. Title equals part 7. Victoria did not answer immediately. She did not need to. The silence itself answered Sophie's question. Daniel rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Sweetheart, that's enough. Sophie looked up at him. Did I say something bad? No, but this is between Victoria and me. Okay. Sophie nodded, then turned toward Aunt Melissa. Can we wait by the window? Melissa understood. Come on, let's count yellow taxis. As they walked several yards away, Victoria looked at Daniel. The polished confidence she had carried into Bellamy's was gone. She's right, she said. About what? You got quiet. Daniel slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. I didn't see much value in arguing. Because you knew I had already decided who you were. Pretty much. Victoria looked down at Sophie's handmade keychain. I called your work unimpressive without knowing you had an engineering degree. I assumed $60 meant you lacked ambition without asking what you sacrificed to save it. I treated your daughter like an obstacle before I even met her. Daniel listened without rescuing her from the discomfort. And the worst part, Victoria continued, is that none of what I just learned should have been necessary. His eyes lifted. Necessary for what? For me to respect you. Daniel remained still. Victoria took a breath. If you really had been exactly what I assumed upstairs, a maintenance technician with no degree, no hidden career, no impressive past, I still had no right to make you feel small. Something changed in Daniel's expression. Not forgiveness. Recognition. That matters more than the apology you were about to give me. I was about to give you one. I know. Victoria glanced towards Sophie, who was counting taxis against the rain-covered glass with Melissa. She changed the question. Kids do that. I spent my whole career asking what people could contribute, what they could build, what they could earn. She looked back at Daniel. Sophie asked whether I was kind. Harder metric. Apparently. Acquiet brisescap Victoria. Daniel, I'm sorry. He waited. Not because you're secretly qualified enough to impress me. Not because you gave up a better job. Not because your daughter made me feel guilty. Her voice steadied. I'm sorry because you walked into dinner deserving basic dignity, and I made you prove you were worthy of it. Daniel looked toward the staircase. Upstairs, the restaurant continued as though nothing important had happened. Thank you, he said. Victoria's eyes glistened, but she held herself together. That's all. An apology isn't a transaction, meaning you don't say the right words and automatically receive forgiveness. She nodded slowly. Fair. Daniel looked at her wristwatch. You probably have somewhere else to be. Victoria glanced at her phone. 11 notifications waited on the screen. She switched it off. For once, no. Sophie returned, having apparently grown bored with taxis. Are you done talking? Almost, Daniel said. Sophie looked at Victoria. Did Daddy tell you his thermostat joke yet? Victoria shook her head. He has not. Good. Maybe there's still hope. Daniel laughed, despite himself. Victoria smiled, then crouched so she was closer to Sophie's height. Can I answer your question now? Sophie nodded. Your dad treated me with respect tonight. Victoria posed. I didn't give him the same respect back. Sophie's smile faded. Why? Because I made a mistake about what makes someone important. Money. Yes. Sophie thought about that. Daddy says money is important for groceries and the electric bill. Daniel sighed. Thank you for preserving the complexity of my philosophy. Sophie ignored him. But he says it can't tell you who's good. Victoria nodded. Your dad is right. He usually is. Accept directions. Sophie, we got lost going to Wisconsin. Victoria laughed softly. Then Sophie became serious again. Are you going to be nicer now? I'm going to try. Sophie looked at Daniel. Then she gets a second chance. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's not your decision. I know. Sophie reached in her coat and took her father's hand. Then she offered her other hand to Victoria. But Mom used to say good people can have bad days. Victoria looked at the small hand waiting between them. Slowly, she took it. Sophie smiled. Now nobody has to stand alone. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at Victoria, and understood what Sophie had done without planning any of it. She had turned an evening about status into a question of character. And Victoria, still holding the handmade keychain, finally asked the one question Daniel had never expected to hear. If I asked for another chance to know you properly, what would I have to? : Writing variant equals document ID equals 84621 title equals part 8. Daniel looked at Victoria for a long moment. Sophie stood between them, still holding one hand from each adult, as though she had personally decided nobody was allowed to retreat. You don't earn a second chance with one perfect sentence, Daniel said. Victoria Nadif. Then tell me where to start. Stop trying to fix things. I'm a CEO. Fixing things is approximately 80% of my personality. Sophie smiled. What's the other 20? Victoria glanced down at her. Coffee. Daniel laughed softly. The tension in the lobby loosened, but only slightly. I mean it, he said. No job offers. No favors. No expensive apology. Victoria looked at Sophie's keychain in her hand. What about dinner? What about it? I'd like to try again. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Tonight, not Bellamy's. That narrows Chicago down considerably. You choose. Sophie immediately lifted her hand. Miller's Diner. Daniel looked down. Nobody asked the committee. They have pancakes. Victoria Smaïd. That sounds persuasive. Daniel shook his head. Miller's closes at 10. Victoria checked her watch. It's 8:47. You really want to leave Bellamy's and eat pancakes at a diner? I want to sit somewhere I can learn who you are without checking whether your jacket belongs in the room. Daniel studied her face. That sounded rehearsed. It wasn't. Good. Was it terrible? A little. Sophie giggled. Victoria accepted the verdict with a smile. Aunt Melissa approached and handed Daniel Sophie's small backpack. I can still take her home if you two want to finish talking. Daniel looked at Sophie. School tomorrow. I know. Bedtime. I know. And pancakes are not a vegetable. Sophie sighed. Nobody's perfect. Victoria laughed again, more freely this time. Daniel looked toward the rain outside. 1 hour. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? 1 hour at Miller's. Then home. Victoria's expression softened. Is that my second chance? No, what is it? Pancakes. They stepped outside beneath Bellamy's awning. The November rain had weakened to a mist, turning the streetlights into soft halos across the wet pavement. Avalete proucht Victoria. Ms. Bennett, shall I bring your car around? Before she answered, Sophie pointed toward Daniel's old blue Chevrolet parked across the street. We can all go with Daddy. Victoria looked at the truck she had mocked less than 2 hours earlier. Does the heater work? Daniel asked. Most days. Most. It builds character. Sophie nodded seriously. Sometimes we wear gloves. Victoria handed the valet ticket back. I'll risk it. Inside the Chevrolet, Sophie climbed in the back seat while Victoria settled into the passenger side. The dashboard carried scratches from years of use. A grocery receipt sat beside the cup holder. A small photograph of Sophie and Rachel was tucked near the speedometer. Nothing was polished for appearances. Everything seemed lived in. Daniel started the engine. Warm air rattled weakly from the vents. Luxury, Victoria said. Daniel glanced at her. Careful. That wasn't sarcasm. Sophie leaned forward from the back. Daddy, tell her why you kept the truck. Seatbelt first. Sophie clicked it. Now tell her. Daniel pulled away from the curb. Rachel bought it used when Sophie was born. Victoria looked at the photograph near the dashboard. So that's why you never replaced it. Partly. What's the other part? It runs. Victoria smiled. 10 minutes later, Miller's Diner appeared beneath a glowing red sign. Inside, the waitress greeted Daniel by name and brought Sophie chocolate milk without asking. Victoria watched father and daughter slide naturally into a booth, then noticed the empty seat opposite them. This time, Daniel looked at it and then at her. No embarrassment. No grand declaration. Just a choice. You wanted to know where to start, he said. Victoria Watif. Daniel gestured toward the seat. Sit down. Be yourself. Let us meet that person. Victoria slowly took the third chair. Sophie's face brightened. This is the chair I meant. Daniel looked at his daughter. Sophomore what? It is. Victoria placed a handmade keychain beside her coffee cup. For the first time that evening, she understood that Daniel was not inviting a CEO into his world. He was allowing a woman who had failed him once to enter carefully. The waitress arrived with 3 menus. Sophie opened hers, then looked across at Victoria. If you're really starting over, I have one important question. Victoria smiled. Go ahead. Sophie leaned closer. Would you still want to know my dad if he never became richer than he is right now? Victoria's smile disappeared. Daniel said nothing. Then, Victoria looked at Sophie across the diner table, then at Daniel. Yes, she said. No hosetashchen. No polished executive pause. Even if your dad never earns another dollar more than he does today, I would still want to know him. Sophie studied her carefully. What? Victoria smiled fondly. Because tonight, I finally learned that income tells you what someone earns. It doesn't tell you what they're worth. Daniel's expression softened. That's a significant improvement from 2 hours ago. I had a very good teacher. Victoria looked at Sophie. Actually, 2. Sophie grinned and opened her menu. Then you should celebrate with pancakes. They ordered 3 stacks, bacon for Daniel, strawberries for Sophie, and black coffee for Victoria. No se avas. No cristal glasis. No $60. Calculation hanging over the table. When the check arrived, Victoria instinctively reached toward it, then stopped. Daniel noticed. Progress, he said. I'm learning. Slowly. Be patient. I run a company. Daniel smiled. I've heard. They split the check. Sophie insisted on leaving $1 from her backpack for the waitress. By 10 o'clock, Daniel drove Victoria back to Bellamy's. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, her red coat bundled beneath her cheek. Outside the restaurant, Victoria rested one hand on the door handle. "Thank you for tonight." "Which part?" Daniel asked. "The second part." "That seems fair." She looked at him. "Can I see you again?" Daniel glanced at Sophie through the rearview mirror. "Coffee Saturday. Victoria smiled. Is that a date?" "It's coffee. You really enjoy making me work for definitions." Character building. 3 months later, coffee had become Saturday breakfasts. Saturday breakfasts became walks along Lake Michigan, school science fairs, and evenings at Miller's where Sophie always claimed the third chair before anyone else could. Victoria never offered Daniel another job. She understood now why that mattered. But something else changed. Watching Daniel discuss heating systems with an engineer during a charity renovation project, she saw an old part of him come alive. She said nothing. Weeks later, Daniel made his own decision. He enrolled in a certification program to update his engineering credentials. Not because Victoria had rescued him. Not because he was ashamed of maintenance work. Because Sophie was older now, sleeping peacefully through every night, and Daniel realized fatherhood had never required him to bury every dream forever. A year after that first dinner, Daniel accepted a local engineering position with predictable hours. When he told Sophie, she hugged him and said, "See, you didn't lose your dream. You just made it wait." Victoria had to turn toward the window to hide her tears. Another year passed before Daniel brought Victoria back to Bellamy's. This time, he did not wear an old jacket because he was trying to impress her. Victoria did not arrive as a CEO measuring a stranger. And Sophie came with him in a bright blue dress, proudly taking the third chair. Victoria reached into her purse and placed something on the table. Sophie recognized it immediately. The handmade keychain was faded now, its blue cord worn from daily use. "You kept it?" Sophie asked. "Every day. Even at work?" "Especially at work." Daniel looked at Victoria. "Make room for kindness. Best management advice I ever received." Sophie smiled. "I was 9. Exactly. My consultants charge much more." They laughed, and the room around them continued without noticing the quiet miracle at one table. There had been no sudden fortune, no grand rescue, no magical erasing of the past. Daniel had never needed Victoria's money to become worthy. Victoria had needed Sophie's innocence to understand he had always been worthy. And Sophie had needed nothing except to see her father treated with the same respect he taught her to give everyone else. Daniel reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. Sophie placed hers over both of theirs. The third chair was empty no longer. Sometimes grace does not arrive loudly. Sometimes redemption begins with an apology, grows through patience, and survives because someone chooses to change. And sometimes the smallest person in the room sees the greatest truth first. Dignity cannot be purchased. Respect should never depend on status. And a second chance means little unless you become worthy of the person who gives it.